Let me formally introduce the discussants. I have been strictly instructed to not to say more than 2 lines about each one of them. And because I have the mic, I'm going to not listen to them. So our first discussant is Radharani Mitra, who is known for crafting award-winning campaigns and has been the global creative advisor at BBC Media Action, leveraging behavioral and cultural insights to design communication that is evidence-based, audience-driven for the past 17 years. Radharani also teaches, publishes, and speaks widely on social and behavioral change communication. Santosh Desai is our next discussant. He's a rock-solid friend of Breakthrough, and that is, as I'm sure you will appreciate, his primary identity. Other than that, Santosh is the CEO of Future Brands Limited. He's a leading figure in branding and marketing. He has a very popular weekly column, City City Bang Bang, in a leading daily, where, among other things, he wonders at times, why is afternoon the least recognized part of the day, and asks you to learn from it. A keen observer of social culture and its effects on large populace, it is always an amazing learning experience to listen to Santosh. Our third discussant is Shekhar Menon, who is the Senior Program Officer, Behavioral Insights at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. A learner practitioner of behavior science, Shekhar believes that applying behavioral science effectively goes beyond traditional behavior change communication, and he creates possibilities of testing the same. Shekhar, not more than 2 lines, huh? You have to give me that. Yamini Atmavilas leads the Gender Equity and Women's Leadership portfolio in Dasra. She is known for building impactful partnerships to advance gender justice. It has always been great to listen to Yamini, especially on how gender norms play out within systems. Today, however, we are looking at her to moderate the discussion. I hereby welcome all of them on stage: Radharani Mitra, Santosh Desai, Shekhar Menon, and Yamini Atmavilas.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. In preparing for this panel, we went through a few different, should I call them mindscapes? We decided there would be no moderator. And then we decided there should be some kind of kickoff moderation, because who would start? If we're also committed to being non-hierarchical, none of us would start. And then we thought, like, should we start with Shekhar maybe? And then we thought maybe that's, he's a funder and he's a man. That's not a norm we want to reinforce. Then we thought, should we start with Radharani? And she just strictly scolded me, so I can't really start with her. So I'm going to kick this off. And then, of course, Santosh also just said, obviously no. So there is some hidden logic there. So I'm going to kick off, and we thought what we do is we would each reflect on one particular question and then sort of see if we are interesting enough to each other to spur questions and conversations between ourselves in the spirit of really making this a fireside chat. And I would also say we'd love to invite anyone else who'd like to sort of jump in if what we're saying sounds interesting or provocative enough. Jump in with the permission of Breakthrough, that we don't create complete chaos here. But we really want this to be a conversation about what's changing, what's not changing, and about Breakthrough and what Breakthrough's work has been. So to the question we decided that we would start with is just a reflection from each of us on one thing that we think, in the spirit of talking about progress, about change, and just keeping our optimism high on the arc of change towards progressive values. I think what is one thing that we feel has changed in India, whether it's a norm, whether it's social behavior. I think all of us have had very heated discussions around norms, behavior change, rituals, beliefs, attitudes, etc. So with all due sort of mea culpa to everyone that we might be mixing it all up in this opening sort of setting the stage, we decided we would talk about one thing that we think has changed in the last 10 to 15 years, and that we feel is deep enough. And so I will kick this off myself in the in being a very good first bencher, always going last. I will now change that in myself. I think for me, one of the biggest things and top of mind for me has been girls and sport, and sort of seeing not just that space as being where you see greater gender equality and equity growing with more and more women in sports organically and otherwise sort of coming up, but also sports becoming a site, a fertile ground for conversations around gender, sexuality, class, opportunity, inequality, policy. And so I think for me, this has been one of the, as someone who's never followed sport and maybe ran one race in my life, in school, I think this has been such a moment of inspiration even for someone like me who otherwise has no interest in it. So I do think that there is something happening in that sphere, unnoticed by many of us, and I feel that that's giving us both cause to really talk about what's happening around gender, power, equality, inequities, caste, religion, region, marginality, in a way that very structured, large campaigns have been unable to, perhaps. And so I think that, for me, is one of the things that has just completely transformed the public discourse in India. And I'll link that also, of course, to aspiration building for younger women. There is now among young women, but also parents, that this is something that is respectable, it's something that is aspirational, and it's something that you have to find a way to support. And it's sounding anecdotal, but I do think that there is a cultural shift that's happening because of girls in sport, and would love to sort of hear from my co-panelists. I'll hand it to Shekhar.
Your sports and girls comment, that actually reminded me of a documentary movie that came out recently, very nicely named, called Kicking Balls, about a set of girls who actually uses sports as a way to get over some deep-rooted prejudices and norms. Right? That's not my example. That I just got reminded of that. I come from a part of India where 100 years ago, the norm was that a woman could just keep the husband's slippers right outside the door, and that's a signal for the husband, you don't need to come back again, right? From that, there's a lot of slippage backwards. So norms can go anyway. I thought I'll take another example of a very local norm, to be more hopeful that norms can shift, norms can be shifted fast, norm can shift in certain contexts. And that's right outside here, right? You walk into Delhi Metro, and what do you notice? Most conspicuously, the absence of filth. You step in, it's much cleaner than anywhere else in Delhi. You step out, Delhi is a mess in most parts, right? Not Lutyens Delhi, but. So norms of littering is very quickly shifted in our heads the minute we step in. So it's very quickly shifted out when you step out as well. So norms get activated in certain contexts. You don't need to wait 20 years for norm to shift. There are ways in which we can start engineering, shifting some norms very quickly. Hopefully that gives us some hope. Maybe some other examples will also give us hope. So, Santosh.
Yeah, thank you for that. To me, one of the things that when I was growing up, certainly if somebody had told me that in my lifetime I would see the kind of shift that we have seen in attitudes towards smoking, I certainly would have been very surprised, because it was a part of life. It's almost like we didn't smell cigarette smoke, right? I mean, it was air. Like cigarette smoke was air, and it was oxygen for whatever it is worth. You never walked into a room and said, "Oh man, this is filled with smoke," because all rooms were filled with smoke, right? I mean, it was just the way to be, and from there we've come to a place today where we see this very significant shift that has happened. And if I think about it, I think in some ways I find it interesting as an example, because I think it kind of encompasses the fact that any change, whether in behavior or in norm, is ecological in nature, and that there is a set of interrelating kind of factors that mesh together and work to produce a change. So if I was to look and sort of decompose some of the elements of this change, there is a scientific part to it, which is from the time when the good people from the industry that I came from, earlier advertising told everyone that smoking was good for you, it made you a man and it made you all those wonderful things, and that is actually good for your health, to the time when then there was a bunch of scientists who came and actually disabused us of that notion and established this link between cancer and other terrible diseases and smoking. That then the beginning of a whole lot of campaigns of communication that made that link stronger. Some used threats, some used the fact that you'll die horrible deaths. They used a variety of appeals to try and appeal to smokers. Then you had regulatory action, where on packs you had these horrible pictures that started coming in. You had warnings that started coming in. So you had a bunch of regulatory actions. To my mind, however, I think that if I was to think of the most sort of ingenious and brilliant instrument that was used in this entire change ecology, I think it was the construction of the idea of passive smoking. I'm not saying it is fiction, but it is a convenient truth. The idea that smoking is not only injurious to the person, because otherwise the problem always was, okay, I'm smoking, I'm going to die of it, so what's it to you? What's your investment in my smoking? What's your stake in it? Eventually it's my problem, right? If I'm dying and I'm happy dying, so be it. The moment we move from that to the idea of passive smoking, everything changes. Because now you are directly threatening me. I, the non-smoker, who otherwise had no stake at all in this conversation, I am suddenly a very important stakeholder. It socialized the idea of the harms of smoking. And I think that, to my mind, was a really powerful inflection point, which turned things around, which then allowed governments to come in with regulations like the fact that on a flight you can't smoke, which again I think is a very significant, it's not a nudge, it's a shove actually, but it is the fact that if you can't smoke on a 7-hour flight or a 14-hour flight, that period of non-smoking itself I think is becomes significant. So I think the idea that public smoking spaces should be smoking free, I think is something that was enabled by the fact that there was. So if you think about it, there is a lot of conversation often about behavior change versus norm change. What is permanent, what is temporary, what is more fundamental, what is not. But I think this is an example where there is an interweaving that takes place between the two. There is an attempt to change norms, to change mindsets. Between that, then there is behavior change, nudges, and then you add to it, that results further in more norm changes. It's hardly as if people have stopped smoking, but I think the narrative around smoking has changed dramatically. And I think it's an interesting example of this whole ecology of norm change.
One feels very intimidated to speak after Santosh Desai. As I told him a little while back, everything I think of, he writes about it next week. And
I'm very grateful.
No, so the thing for me that I've seen changing, and it's something that we all see all around us, is the QR code on that little card that we all use to make UPI payments. So because I like telling stories, I'll illustrate my point with a story. My plumber Santaram came to do some work for me. He had to go out and buy parts. I didn't have any money at home. So he said, "Koi baat nahi, ma'am. I'll go to the shop. I'll see what I have to buy. I'll let you know. Then you can, GPay me the money." So I said, okay. So I sent him some money. Then it turned out that I had paid him extra. He said, "Koi baat nahi. Extra jo hai, I will pay you back." So, in about 45 minutes, there was this chain of transactions between Santaram, the sanitary ware shopkeeper, the store owner, and me. And it was, and this kind of completely equal, and I'm not romanticizing the equality of that transaction or of that engagement, but it happens to us more than once, more than 5 times every day, right? This is obviously something that is systemic. It's part of this whole DPI revolution that has taken place in India, and it is a behavior to be clicking on your phone. But I think it is also bringing about some sort of a fundamental change in the way people think of money in the way women are looking at digital access, and in the so-called conditional access that women are granted or permitted because of convenience's sake. And my hope as a person who has been in the business of change is that one day, and I'm sort of also going from UPI to something bigger, something more macro, one day this convenience that is because of safety, because of household income, because of just interaction, all of that, that is granted to a woman because she is now being given access to a smartphone and data, and it's co-share. That convenience will become so normalized that a woman can then sit with a phone, and I'm going to take a very physical sort of metaphor of how all of us who have worked with adolescents knew that loitering was bad, that women can sit with their phones and loiter on their phones for enjoyment, for pleasure, to make reels, and the men, the mothers-in-law, the older brothers will not sit and say, oh, you cannot do that, because that is not what good girls or good women do. So for me, the biggest change actually going from the UPI payment is the ubiquitousness of the smartphone with restricted and conditional access that can finally lead to some sort of norm change, because I think the ownership and use of data and smartphones are now largely conditional. So I'm hoping that will change over time.
I actually just wanted to add to that, because I think that's a very interesting thing that is happening in terms of a trigger for change. I think technology, what is interesting about technology is it kind of changes things invisibly, because it changes things in a way that happens at a deeper structural level. What I mean by that is that if you think about the mobile phone and the smartphone in particular, it works most profoundly at the level of the gesture. What I mean by that is the fact that you have a phone. The phone is implicitly communicating with you. It is implicitly telling you are important, that you get to make a few thousand decisions in a day, particularly in constituencies that do not have agency, that have not had the ability to make individual decisions. Here's this device where you are pinching, flipping, liking, disliking. There is a range of activities that you're flipping, you're changing from one app to another. All of it is, there is this device that jumps to your every whim and fancy, that is telling you through its form that you are important, that you are significant, whatever you want will happen. It happens even more, in the more limited audience, in a touch screen. A touch screen is about instant responsiveness. It's about something you touch and something else happens. There is a cause and effect, and the fact that my own significance gets underlined through the fact that every little action of mine produces a response. And I think that kind of an ability to increasingly put yourself at the center of the world, and which is why that you see in the selfie, right? It is such a joyful kind of an underlining of the fact that I am important. I can be in front of the most beautiful monument in the world, but I will first take a photograph like this. I'm at the forefront, and the monument is a very pleasing backdrop, right? That is how we have increasingly started to reframe the relationship between the individual and the rest of the world. And I think that is what is happening with technology. And just to add to this, the idea of how, particularly when it comes to women, there is such a profound shift that is beginning to happen. So this is a small sort of an anecdote. I think this is I forget now, maybe Bikaner or somewhere in Rajasthan. Extremely conservative kind of a family and a community. And so the women of those, the family had a WhatsApp group. In the WhatsApp group, and while being extremely and really, very, very, otherwise following all customs and norms of the family, there was this woman who would refer to her husband only as Mr. Khadus. So in all her messages to everybody else, "Aaj Mr. Khadus ne ye kaha, aaj Mr. Khadus ne," it was amazing. It was a very minor act of sort of asserting her own individuality, but in a otherwise where she was not allowed any kind of agency. The fact that she could say this, and the fact that it acts as an escape hatch in many ways, it acts as this connection with the outside world. The fact that you're not alone. There are so many different ways in which technology has other kinds of effects also, not all of them, empowering. But it's certainly true that when it comes to women, it has played a great role in giving options that did not exist earlier.
And after lifting positive experiences, I don't know whether I should go, the glass half full kind of mode. Half empty. We assume the arc of progress is always for the good, right? Yeah. But in this movement of technology towards making UPI ubiquitous, there are many underlying factors that we completely forget, right? So who owns the smartphones? In most cases, the men.
Yeah.
Who gets to use bank accounts? Most cases, the men. Earlier, the woman at least had some power, some money, and now you're increasingly moving that away by making it digital. So in an ideal 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, you might have no digital gender gap, you might not have no sort of digital capacity gap, and UPI might not have any sort of adverse consequences. But the norms of who owns the phones, who uses the phones, who's permitted to use the phones, as you said, is right now making a real impact. So while we move towards digital, etc., the unintended consequences are erosion of some liberty, some power that women had, and some things that we really need to put women back into the center while designing some of these.
Yeah. I just wanted to say one thing, because we've done this work together, Shekhar, you and I, when I was at Media Action very recently, that, when we learned about a lot of things in our, we were exploring and looking at these things. And to me, at the end of that exploration, the smartphone really became like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, completely schizophrenic and doing many good things and doing many bad things. And because it has the capacity of doing many bad things, it is becoming more and more convenient for the gatekeepers to use those as excuses to further, allow or disallow technology used by women. So it is a double-edged knife, and it's very difficult to formulate an answer or a solution. And, but it begs the question of the schizoid nature of technology as well in our lives, and particularly in a country like India, where we live in so many centuries. Within one household, there are so many centuries.
Yeah, no, I think for me, what that trigger two things, right? One, definitely agree in terms of who's accessing technology, what are the terms of that engagement. But I also think there's a larger framing around markets, right? And I think we end up having conversations about women in technology in terms of households, and we say men versus women. There's a zero-sum game. The man owns it, the woman tries to access it, and there's that power struggle there. But actually, who's organizing all of this is markets, it's technology markets, it's cell markets. It's like a larger structure that's actually trying to move more people digital, and definitely then organize information in a way that is also about, at the end of the day, benefiting markets. And I also want to sort of then shift it a little bit to say markets also come outside of technology. Markets also are patriarchal institutions, right? I think our NFHS tends to measure gender norms, the 4-5 questions, that module that we've had. It's always about men, do you have permission to go to the market, go to the PHC and go outside? And it's about the husband or the father, and it's within a very household context. And I think this critique is something that we've all made for a while now. Also shifting again to your point, Santosh, I think the lure of what technology and how the cell, the relationship between self and structure becomes so, in some ways, collapsed, and it can be extremely solipsistic, right? It can just be me, I, me, myself. But at the end of the day, that's also benefiting somebody. And I think this is where, not to go like completely conspiracy theory about this stuff, but it's actually like all of this is very organized, systemic sort of spaces where markets are kind of getting ahead, where policies are not yet there. For example, all of the possibilities, just taking the technology example one step further, women able to communicate better, access information better via digital technology. What is the policy imagination there? It's just been distribute smartphones. It's not been like reset that entire relationship. Let's figure out what it is that would actually make a smartphone more empowering to women, and what might be the policy nudges that may not necessarily just be about giving women phones. It may be about changing how technology is accessed and changing the cost structures, and also the content structures. So I also think that little bit of shifting out of bringing norms out of the household and out of micro institutional spaces to these larger institutions is really, really critical. So I don't know if others have a view.
No, I have a somewhat tangential response to that, which is to say that it's about if you're talking about change. See, there are two ways to think about this. One is to critique it as an entire system, and yes, it is an organized system. There are kind of there are reasons why things operate the way they do. But if you're focusing on change, and if you're particularly trying to bring about change in very entrenched ways of thinking and modes of thinking, then what is likeliest to get traction is to accelerate change that is already happening, whether it is happening in very small ways, whether it is happening in a small part of the constituency. But it is because if change is ecological, if change is already beginning to happen, then there are a set of forces that are already working together to enable that change, however little it might be. So that process has begun. I think as anybody intervening in that process, to arrogate to oneself the power to change everything, and to change fundamentally all structures that have conspired over millennia to produce a certain kind of an effect, the critique is valid. To not recognize the fact that it is part of an institutional failing, or it is part of a system that is deeply compromised, is absolutely fair. But if your vantage point is not that of a critic, but of somebody who wants to enable change, then aren't you better off looking at change that is happening or beginning to happen, where there are enabling conditions that are available to us for accelerating that change and intervening to the extent to which one can, which is not a lot. I mean, no intervention is capable of actually producing norm change at scale by itself if there weren't forces already trying to bring about some change. And so therefore, I think there's a measure of realism here that I think is needed, particularly if the frame, it depends on the frame one is using, but if the frame is behavior change and norm change, then I think we have to look for things that are beginning to change and intervene to the extent to which we can.
A quick example from day before yesterday, when I was at a breakthrough site in Ghazipur, 2 hours away from Varanasi. You talk about things that can change, right? Not all norms are not equal, right? And this village that we were in, for some reason, there were like 3-4 colleges that were well functioning. Some of them were women's, girls' colleges, etc. What is interesting is the negotiation that the kids had done at home to say, let me at least complete my degree and my master's. There are institutions right here. So they negotiated within the boundaries of control that they had. The next step of negotiation for them is, okay, let me find a job, let me go on. But that's a bridge too far right now for them. But they've started on that journey. And there was a beautiful set of moments of negotiation that came out brilliantly yesterday or day before yesterday. I really thank Breakthrough for facilitating that. Sorry, just a small.
No. Can I jump in one quick? Can I jump in? I think just a quick response, Santosh. I think it also depends on what change. I mean, there is incrementalism you can practice because you want to stay within a particular boundary, but I think you're also becoming then complicit with that. So I think it's not just about like being the pragmatic route. I think it's also about where is the arc towards justice and where do we want to head with it. Right? The other one minor point, and then Radhan, you can jump in. I also want to, I think we keep saying gender norm change and behavior change, and I feel like they are not the same thing. And so I think that behavior change is one method or one tool for us to enter the space of changing larger structures. But thanks to, I think, donor environments and just our researchers who've become very, very well circulated, I think we've reduced norm change to a behavioral economic sort of approach, right? And I think gender norms, the whole like science history of gender norms is about power. It comes from understanding systems, structures of power, and even the methodologies are very different about mapping those power systems and then trying to understand where are the nodes of inequality, where are the nodes of change, all of that. So I think there is that kind of collapsing of the two in some ways, and I will try maybe be a little provocative, has left us a little bit lesser in terms of trying to understand and really shift, doubled with our hope that there is a stroke of the pen change, right? We want like the inheritance law, we want some of these big things, because to your point, you can be incrementalist, but actually there's also a transformative possibility that can actually disrupt the structures of power as they've been so far. So I think that there is a space for that, and I think staying focused on power and not taking power out of the equation and making it all about transactional and behaviors and I don't know, like 15 kinds probably Shekhar can rattle off. I think that then reduces the framing of our problem statement and therefore our imagination of how change can happen and how big change can be.
No, I'm going to just, try and sort of distill what I think from what my chatterers have said. We can't call them panelists. I think that, change, and I like to visualize it for myself as a dartboard where change is really the bullseye, right? And that may be a certain behavior that is difficult to change, or it may be largely social change. It can be systemic change. And no intervention, no single intervention can really hit the bullseye at one go. And I think that that's the mistake a lot of us make, because we are, getting mixed up in all these frameworks. Some are based on behavioral science, some are based on behavioral economics. There is this nudge theory, then there is that other theory, and we get all terribly muddled, and then we have to, write proposals to get money from donors. So it's just sometimes it's an unholy mess. So in order to extricate my own head out of that mess, and I haven't always succeeded, it's best to see that if you need to get to that change, some of it may be incremental and, being on the gravy train, like Santosh, you said, or some of it has to be more sort of, authentic and more transformative. I think that the pathway of change should be designed in a way that we keep hitting those outer concentric circles, right? And the trouble, or I think the challenge amongst all of us who are in this business of change, is that we need to finish an intervention within a stipulated period of time, and then we have to create a body of evidence, and that will get us more money to do something else. So we don't stay with something. So Shohini, when you said that you actually went back and, and I could think I'd feel very proud of myself for being able to remember like a longitudinal study of going back and looking, 7 years later, did you say, at whether those changes have stuck or not. That luxury a lot of people do not have, right? So within the construct of the sector, within the construct of wanting to create change, given all the systemic, the cogs and the wheels, how do we choose what we want to change and define a pathway? And that, I think, is moot. And I don't think we always get to do that in a very sensible, commonsensical manner, because, a lot of it gets then wrapped up in all this jargon and this science and that science. And I think we need to simplify our own I'm not trying to be simplistic here. I'm just trying to say that we all need to be simpler to look at some of these very complex problems.
All right. So, as a non-moderator, I'm going to take the mic and sort of open this up for discussion. I've been told there's 7-8 minutes left. Would love to hear any comments, questions, reflections from the audience, and then maybe we'll do a final round.
Thank you so much for this very lovely way of, having this interaction of chatterers and bringing up all these issues. I think I'm really struck by the whole, where we need to think deeply is what you raised, Yamini, and it sort of struck me right in the beginning when you gave the example of the metro station and behavioral change, and you spoke about smoking and, how seamlessly you can move from social change to behavioral change. But I think what you said, Yamini, is really the more difficult, the more challenging of how to bring about the social norms change. And you started with sports. And I think that's an excellent example of how, and depending on where you locate it, and this is a comment, it's, at the larger level, you have the poguts and, it's there on your face. And that is something that really has shifted the needle. On the other hand, we have, the whole thing of women, young adolescents in villages getting into playing football, okay? And there are amazing examples of the kinds of things it does, just this one intervention, right from claiming space which were used only by boys, playgrounds and girls never went in, right from changing, women who had to be covered, wearing shorts, okay? And then also when it is tied with an NGO, like that's what I have seen, is where you have discussions on your body, on sexuality, and how that becomes a means for not just individual change, but because you are then becoming so visible on the playground for also the parents and the whole community in general. And I think that's a very fascinating piece for me, that how you can bring in both behavior and social norms, but with the very fundamental things, because you are, as you said, where are the structures of power? Where is it that you can make a difference? And I think this is a very simple way. The other comment I had was about, I think it's very interesting to think about conditional access to smartphones versus access of convenience, or even instrumental access, like when girls, very few girls had access to phones during COVID, when education went online, and what it has done to young girls and, them being out of school. It reminded me of, I think that's a great aspiration, and, we hope that digitalization and all this UPI will make the change. But also let's remember, and that's where I come in as a bit of a skeptic, once upon a time, women would sort of scrape money, keep them under their pillows in little rice box, tin box, and all of that. And that was very subversive because the men of the house didn't know they were saving. They didn't have access to bank account. Now there's financial inclusion and all of that, but it has become very transparent what their savings are. Where is the space for subversion? And we know patriarchal power does end up in having control over women's money. So I think we need to think about this also. How do we kind of begin to challenge some of this and see what excludes, what includes women, and whether, digital is, yes, it is, but, there's the other side to it. Thanks.
Well, with that,
Not really to wind up, right? I wanted to bring in this aspect of, when you talk about sports in a village, when that happens, and you talk about women wearing shorts for the first time, girls wearing shorts for the first time, exercising their agency, going out and playing, claiming a space, etc. I want to talk a little bit about the role of media in actually sharing and spreading that around. Right? All fundamentally, I'm not talking gender norms. Norms are second order beliefs, right? What I believe Raju, Ramu, Sita, Salima do, and they expect me to do, and what I expect them to do. There's a real using media. There's a extremely important way to scale some of the small unitized change in a small village. It's very different from individual behavior change. You can engineer a small individual behavior change in that space, but for norms change, you need to be visible that Raju, Ramu, Sita, Salima, everybody is also playing. You need to make it visible that everybody approves of them playing as well. So people here, and especially the earlier panel, which actually talked about art and media, amplifying such examples, making it permissible for girls to do this, making it regular, normal for girls to do this. I think a role of media in amplifying this is also something we need to really, one, congratulate Breakthrough for starting this 25 years ago, but also keep at it.
May I just add a point here? I was recently in Tanzania working on a multi-platform, very iconic media brand that over 10 years has become as iconic in that country as KBC became in ours. And it's a program meant for young people with a very focused sort of emphasis on gender. And this was time for a reset because the country is beginning to have elections. This, as of September, they've started with local elections and going up to national elections next year. So while we were kind of working on this whole thing of how to reset, there were several things that struck me as, how media can really play a role in upping the ante on many things, not just, the space girls and young adults can have. In a conversation about national politics, but even things like intergenerational conversation, because these are countries where elders and seniors have a lot of power. So there's huge power dynamics between older people and younger people, but also through the community outreach, through the the stuff that they're doing on social media. There was every day that I was there working with the team, there was this light being shone on the fact that art is so important, music is so important, and I think that somewhere we who think of ourselves as designing interventions and bringing about change, we sometimes lose sight of the power of art and the power of culture, the power of music. I myself, we was part of the team that created a ringtone out of the word condom, the condom ringtone. Recently, we've done a song. So, I think this is a really nice way to end because we have the powerhouse duo. Yeah. But yeah, we should not just forget about the power of things that are there and get into endless frameworks, which can sometimes cause a little bit of problem.
On that note, thank you so much for listening to us. And we are very excited about the next panel. So we'll hurry out of this space. Thank you.
Thank you.